All right, here we go. And welcome to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with your host, Brent Mekosh. Brent, good to be with you. Crazy times we live in, but
Bill,
it's good to see you.
it's fantastic to see you as well, and absolutely crazy times. And I think that's why our discussion today is going to be very timely. Those that listen to the show know that last week we had David Martins on and discussed kind of bias in the media and
Mm.
mainstream media versus citizen journalism, and the way that we are getting and consuming our news. And offline, you know, everyone that listens to this show hears Bill in the beginning and some comments at the end, and they're not privy to these conversations that we have both before and after the show, nor do they really know the depth of experience that Bill has. I mean, this is a guy with an award-winning career in journalism that we're fortunate enough to have here, curating this experience with us. And I felt it was a really timely time to spend an episode talking to Bill and just talk what his career in journalism has been, what his thoughts on journalism are. Because now, as we're recording this, we've got a new presidential candidate, Kamala Harris. So it's Harris versus Trump. Last time we spoke, it was Biden versus Trump, and the abrupt turns and twists that you're seeing in the media. Both mainstream and also through some of the more open platforms such as X has been really, really stark. And from my standpoint, I want to understand this I want to understand journalism and the media in general more. And Bill knows a lot about it. So, Bill, why don't you just people have heard your voice and they've seen you on the YouTube channel, but how about a little bit of background in terms of what got you into journalism and what got you where you are today?
It is a weird road, Brent. So buckle up, and I'll make it really fast. But
Not too fast, because I know
no,
it's
no, no, man, no,
the
no.
bits and
We
pieces
got a
I've heard
lot
have
of
been
stuff. We got a
exciting.
lot. I got a lot of thoughts in this head, but to get us into journalism from where I came from, I didn't start in journalism. I started telling stories, and I started actually uh, in communications. I was a theater major at Baylor University. I spent a number of years working in regional theaters and working with a lot of well-known people. The most well-known playwright I worked with was Sam Shepard, and and I did a number of projects with his then wife. And the point being, I liked stories. And at the time, my politics were pretty left wing in terms of my mind. And the thing that intrigued me about politics at that moment in my life was that I really didn't think that America was a racist nation. I thought we were a classist nation. And so I defined my worldview, if you will, just really simply, in terms of economics.
Give us
Because
give us what era was this? So give us a timeline on that. Where
this
we
would be the mid 70s.
mid 70s? Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, mid 70s. So I'm thinking in those terms. And then I got to a point where I was restless and I needed a change. And I came to New York City. And I still believe the power of stories has always intrigued me. And the idea that it's like economics plays a much greater role in our lives than we realize, than we're conscious about, than we know. And I needed a job. And I went to CNN, and it was 2 years old at the time,
Wow.
and sat down and got an interview and got a job. And I went to work initially for about 6 months, writing and working with Mary Alice Williams, who was handling the primetime show at the time. And I was a news writer for her. And I then moved over to CNN Business News, where I thought, okay, I understand this. This is a home. I like this. And it was a vast department of like five people. It was me, another producer, two other producers, Lou Dobbs, Myron Kendall, Todd Benjamin, and Tom Cassidy. That was the department. And then the rest was history from there, because it made my worldview, and it fit with my worldview, and it gave definition to it. And I was really fortunate to work with people who believed and honored the tradition of journalism, and believed in the simple moniker that it's like the primary goal. And Bill Moyers actually said this the best. The primary goal as journalists is we have a responsibility to hold people in power to accountability. And we have the unique access to do that. And so I was taught by people who were like driving it home every single day. You have the right and responsibility to hold people accountable in power and to hold people responsible and to present arguments to people, to let them look at those arguments and understand what the arguments about any particular story or issue is. And so that's my simple background. And it led me into producing Lou's, what that show at the time was called Moneyline,
Yeah, I remember that show well. Yep.
when the stock market crashed in '87, and we all had our heads spinning around. And I was fortunate enough to win, along with the other folks in the CNN Business News division, of George Foster Peabody for our coverage of that. An award I still remain proud of, and I will tell you, everybody who worked that story worked it tirelessly, day in and day out, for weeks at a time. And we had to fight a New York Stock Exchange, which didn't want. You know a little bit about this, Brent.
Sure.
Not that you were there for this, but the New York Stock Exchange was not always this open, accessible place.
Yeah.
And,
Yes. There were cameras
we
down
had
there
to.
on the floor.
Oh man, no, it was like we had to fight with him every single day. And we were down there on Wall and Broad, and there were hundreds of media clamoring and beating for it. And I kept trying to explain to the head of communications, you've got to talk to us. You don't understand. You have to speak with us. This is your responsibility. And you know, and from there I went on to other accomplishments within financial news, including building at one point and launching the CNN Financial News Network, CNN FN,
Yep.
which was the first all digital network. And that made it unique in and of itself. But what also made it unique was that we had a website that was tied to the television program, as opposed to separate and independent of. And that was a tremendous experience. And at one point, actually, my team, myself, and a couple other people were responsible for 200, actually a little more than 200 journalists in three continents, in London and in America and in Asia, with cities in London, Tokyo, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. And then from there, Brent, I took a weird turn. I went from news management into on air, which is the opposite direction than most people go. That's
Mhm.
not the way you do these kinds of things. And as a reporter, I was very fortunate to be involved in a bunch of economic news coverage and a change in terms of the program, because those of us who were doing what then became Lou Dobbs Tonight, we started thinking we can't just keep talking about stock prices day in and day out. We need to start talking about economic policy. We need to start talking about the impact of that policy. And so I was phenomenally fortunate to be able to I did tons of stories on on education policy, the failure of schools. We were on the forefront of talking about what needed to happen in terms of education, in terms of immigration, in terms of the factories and the outsourcing of America. We had uh, three in the war on the middle class, and we had three nominations for Emmys, and we won one of those. So I have an Emmy downstairs along with my George Foster Peabody, which is nice.
You got to put those awards behind you
Yeah, I know.
so,
Yeah,
so
right.
we can see
Sit
these
back here.
things. Yeah, exactly.
It's funny when the FedEx guy was delivering a package. And he's like, right door. Went to the door. I was like, hey, and he goes, hey, I get your baggage for you. I said, thanks. He goes, can I ask you a really quick question? I said, sure. Well, what's up? And he goes, this just may seem weird, but is that like an Emmy
You're like, damn
in
right
the
it is.
window there? And I was like, yeah, that's an Emmy. He goes,
Yeah,
that's so cool, man.
absolutely. Well, let me ask you this. You had mentioned that when you were young, obviously you viewed sort of society not necessarily left or right, but from a class perspective.
Right.
And it may surprise you to know that I actually agree with that. And I think that the history of humanity is different stratospheres of people or stratuses of people that are looking to keep their place, and that in many cases can involve
Yeah.
keeping people below them down.
Oh yeah.
Did did your experience in financial news media strengthen that original viewpoint that you came into it with, or
Oh,
did it
oh, oh,
dissipate?
very much.
Yeah.
Very, very much. And it gave me a profound understanding of the probably the most profound contribution that the United States has made outside of its Constitution and its Declaration of Independence and its form of government, because the United States really gave the world the middle class.
Yes, it did.
And they
Yep.
introduced to the world the idea of economic mobility. You could be born poor and you could rise up through that socioeconomic ladder and you could become a incredibly successful person. And that was your opportunity.
Yes.
And and man, I mean, Brett, we could do just a podcast on the people who became big and successful, who started out life with nothing, with
It's most
nothing.
wildly successful people.
Yeah. No.
And I agree with you. I think that one of the things the United States has done a lot of great things for the world, but that idea that you could also be born into a very wealthy family and you could squander it all. And if you had nothing of benefit to add to society, those dollars and wealth is gone.
Yeah.
And that I agree with you. I think that we are in a world right now where those at the top, not all of them, of course, but many of them at the top are seeking to reinforce their positions by closing some of those doors behind them, and
Oh no, no,
that
no.
makes
That's the other struggle. No, that's the
yeah,
dynamic, right? That once you get power,
you
you
don't
don't
want to
want
lose
to
it.
give it up.
Nope, nope,
You do not know. I've never met anybody who achieved power who wanted to give it up.
no.
Um,
And they're
you
and they're
know,
protecting their flanks and looking at what the potential threats are. And I've always
yeah,
said the regulatory state is designed less about keeping people safe and more about entrenching the power of the large corporate
hey,
interests that lobby for those regulations.
couldn't
100%
agree
agree with
more.
you. Yep.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, 100%, 100%.
So you made that transition to on air. Which did you like more? Did you like the behind the scenes stuff or did you like the on air side?
Well, this has been it's funny. I like them both, Brent. I really like them both, and I like them both for different reasons. I like it. I like the on air part because it allowed me to engage with people in a really dynamic way to bring the stories to people for them to listen to, right? And to know about. I liked the management side because leadership is a passionate cause for me. And I think that we, especially now, lack leadership, serious leadership. We don't place enough value. I mean, you've had several podcasts devoted to this whole idea of the importance of leadership and what it means and the difference it can make. And so when you're on that management side, that's your responsibility.
Sure
That's
is. Yeah.
you. That's not somebody else. That's you. And I always thought I made a good manager. Um, I leave that up to the people who work for me to decide. But I just, it was like I kept thinking, well, I need to want to do more. I mean, I had a lot of fun in management. Don't get me wrong. I mean, really quick story. We at one point had a joint operating agreement with the Financial Times in London. CNN Business News did, and we were doing a show that was in London, and that show actually I think still continues, only not on CNN, on CNN International today. But we had reached a point where we were unhappy with the partnership with the Financial Times, and I had to fly over because negotiations weren't going well. And we made a decision before I left that it's time to cut the cord. It's time to sever this relationship. And I went into this meeting, and the chairman of the Financial Times was there, along with a cadre of other folks across the table from me. And I was sitting on my side, and I had a couple of people. I had producer of the show, executive producer of the show. I had another colleague of mine and a lawyer, and they walked into the room, and I got to draw upon my past theater experience and everything else, because they sat down at the table and I looked at them and I said, gentlemen, we don't come here to praise Caesar. We come to bury Caesar. This joint operation is dead.
Yeah.
They stood up and they walked out of the room. They stood up, they walked out of the room, and the lawyer looked over at me and he started laughing. And he said, I can't believe you just said that and did that. And I said, well, you knew it was coming. And he goes, I know, but that was brilliant. I
But
just
you got it there a lot faster, man. You didn't waste any time with it. You saved probably thousands of dollars of legal fees as
like,
well.
well, just do this fast, okay?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
So
comedy.
so so where'd you go following the on air stuff? How long did that continue?
At that, well, that continued. When did I'm trying to think. I changed over to on air in 95. I went on air in 95 and I anchored a couple of programs on CNN Financial News, midday program, and a couple other things after we had launched the network. And then I went to I was changed my assignment to a reporter for Moneyline. I left CNN for a brief while, worked for Business Week,
Okay.
in Business Week TV for a while, and then came back to CNN and was there up until they ended the Lou's program on CNN. And then I went to work as an executive producer in radio, and I did a whole bunch of other odd jobs. At one point, I had worked. People don't really appreciate how far ahead of the times Yahoo Finance was, because when I worked for Yahoo Finance uh, as an on-air personality for them at the NASDAQ marketplace, doing live reports and using the NASDAQ wall,
Yeah,
the big wall,
I do.
and the management at the time, and I'm trying to remember the guys' names, but Daly, and they used to run Warner Brothers, and they had a vision of creating a streaming service. And at the time, within Yahoo, there was this big fight about whether they wanted to do streaming news, which is part of what I was involved in, and then they decided to shutter that because they wanted Brent. They had a radical idea of launching a streaming movie service. This is way before anybody heard of Netflix.
Yeah.
And they just couldn't get it off the ground, and they couldn't get it off the ground. But those were the people who, to my knowledge, were the first ones who tried to launch what we now all have in our homes. Like, most of us watch TV like all the time.
And Yahoo, I mean, at that point, looking back on it, I actually still have a Yahoo email account. But it was an absolute juggernaut. I mean, they were Google and many other internet
Yeah, oh
provider or
yeah,
internet websites today all rolled into one. It was
all rolled
incredible.
into one. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, it's great. It was great.
And during an interesting time too, because that was a period of, I graduated college in 1995 and went to work down in the New York Stock Exchange in February 1996, uh,
Okay.
just in time for that final push of the dot
Yeah.
com boom, which
Yeah,
was
you were right. You caught that peak, didn't you?
yeah, which was it was an amazing time. I mean, I think back to that period in the United States, the 90s, through the tail end of the Clinton era, into 2000. And I look at my 9-year-old son, and he will never know America during the 80s and the 90s. And I throw the 80s and the 90s, I'd lump them both in there together because it was unbelievable. And I think like, where did the country dramatically change? It was really September 11th for me. And it wasn't just the event that occurred, because it was
Right.
seismic and massive. It was our response to the event that occurred, which changed the character of the role of the United States government in our lives, I would say, forever.
Yeah.
But so were you in New York? But were you still doing the Yahoo thing by the time 9/11 occurred?
Well, in 9/11, I was working for Business Week
Your
TV.
Business Week then. Okay.
And my 9/11 story is that we used the American Stock Exchange a lot for
Yep.
our offices and interviews and stuff. And the only reason I wasn't there when the plane hit the towers is that I had an interview for like 11 set up. So I took a later bus than usual. I was going to be getting into the city around 8 o'clock, and then I was going to go down and go to my office and set up and get ready for the interviews. And on my way in, there was this woman who kept screaming about we're under attack. We were on the bus, and we're under attack, and we're like, and Brent, you lived in New York, you grew up in Jersey, I mean, those kind of people are like kind of normal, right? You're
Yeah,
like,
you
okay,
run
but
into those. Yeah.
and I'm like thinking, lady, you need to sit down, okay?
Yeah.
It's okay, just sit down. She goes, no, no, we're under attack, we're under attack. We're like, what are you talking about? And she's like, no, 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 there's a plane that ran into the building. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she starts talking about there's a plane that ran into the World Trade Center. And I'm like thinking, well, it was an accident. And she's like, no, no, we're under attack. We're under attack. Somebody called her, someone she knew that worked in the World Trade Center, is how she knew. And of course, she was right.
Mhm.
And we were the first bus not allowed through the Lincoln Tunnel. We
Wow.
were turned around. We were literally turned around and sent away. They said, you can't come in the city. You can't be here. And I remember seeing the towers on fire as we're going down 95. And, and that site's burned into my brain forever. And then
Hmm.
I was in the city the next day. Uh, and we were trying to figure out what to do because we obviously couldn't
Hmm.
could not broadcast from the American Stock Exchange.
Definitely not. No.
And and we couldn't use those offices, and couldn't use any. We had a studio that was in Midtown, and it was a weekly show at that point. It was a syndicated weekly show, and it was horrible. One of the producers, I work with, his wife was down there when the attacks happened. And Brent, it sounds like I'm making this up, but she's mute and she can't hear. And Harlan Ellison wrote a short story called "I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream." And I kept thinking about her during that whole time. And it really was a dramatic, horrible, traumatic event for her and for her husband, because she had no way to talk about what she had seen. And she was there when all of those people began jumping out of the buildings.
Hmm.
And she was there when all of those people who jumped out of those buildings landed on the sidewalk. And no, 9/11 was, yeah, I was in New York for that. And
We both were.
woo, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's hard to talk about that without starting getting emotional about it. It just, oof, man, it was a bad, bad day. Although I have to tell you, 2 days, 3 days in, I'm in the Port Authority. There's nobody, Brent. I'm walking through Port Authority and there's nobody there. And I'm walking through it, and there was this guy, and he was walking toward me. Uh, and we looked at each other, and he looked at me and he goes, "How you doing, brother?" And I said, I'm good, man. I'm good. I said, "Is this amazing?" And he goes, "It's incredible." He said, "It's incredible because have you ever seen people so together
Mhm.
in your whole life?" And I said, "I have never seen anybody or anything like this ever in my whole life." I said, "It's like we're all family." And he goes, "We are all family." And two guys who didn't know each other, and I've never seen him since, hugged each other in the middle of Port Authority, because it was like that was the kind of moment that it was.
Yeah, I think it was. I was not around for the Kennedy assassination, but I think that was loss of innocence number one, and September 11th for sure was loss of
Weirdly,
innocence number two.
weirdly, Brett, I was in fourth grade. My elementary school was maybe 15 miles from where Kennedy was shot. And on the street that my elementary school was on, a little, obviously not right next to the elementary school, but up the road, was where Lee Harvey Oswald lived with his family.
No,
So
wow. Jeez. You're like the Where's Waldo of historical events here, Bill. You know, like,
You're
where's
like,
Bill going to pop
holy
up next?
smoke, man. Yeah.
So post 9/11, then what? Did you get involved? And I believe you did, but did you get involved in any of the war correspondence that occurred following?
I did. Yeah. No, I went over. Actually, Lou and I went over in the first engagement. Um, uh, and were there on the ground. And in fact, Lou, our crew, and me were the first media into Kuwait City after, Saddam had evacuated the city and taken all of the citizens with him and gone up that road. And we were there before anybody else got there. We found military encampments on the bay in Kuwait City. It literally was like a scene out of the Twilight Zone. There was food still on uh, plates.
Hmm.
There was tea still in cups, and walking through the New York, the Kuwaiti Stock Exchange, got tons of video from the Kuwaiti Stock Exchange, from all of the retail districts where all the stores and all the jewelry stores have been raided. And then, we got footage of the evacuation route and the road to hell
Hmm.
uh, that had been bombed out as American bombers pursued Hussein and his army. And then I went back. I was privileged enough to go back a second time, but this time in the second engagement, I wrote a medevac mission, and I flew in a C-17 as we went from Landstuhl Air Force Base, Ramstein Air Force Base, into Kuwait to Balad, and picked up soldiers, wounded warriors. And I had the privilege of speaking with commanding officers on the ground at the time, and then interviewing some of those wounded warriors as we brought them back to Ramstein and then over to Landstuhl Hospital. And I have to tell you, Brent, I've been thinking about that trip a lot lately, because one of the men I spoke with was a man who had been shot in his cheek. He was in a turret. He was in a tank turret. He was surveillance in a tank, and a sniper had fired a bullet, and he after the bullet had been fired, he turned his head. Because he turned his head, the bullet didn't hit him in his face. It hit him in his cheek and went through his cheek and then out the other side, took away part of his jaw. He was going to be fine. He was getting plastic surgery, and he was going to be okay. But I've been thinking about that man for obvious reasons,
Right.
because it's funny what a timely little turn of the head can do. And it was an amazing interview, and I've been thinking about him a lot. So
Like I can imagine. When you say second engagement, we're talking post 9/11 here. We're talking about the invasion of Iraq, correct?
yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, yeah.
And how much time did you spend over there? And did you make it to Afghanistan at all during the global war on terror?
I did not make it to Afghanistan. I met a lot of in my first in the first engagement when we attacked Iraq under Bush. Um, I did meet a lot of Mujahideen because they were over there as allies, as for allied forces with us and fighting alongside of us, but never ever made it into to Afghanistan, um, which was an engagement that I thought was wrongheaded from the get go. But yeah, no, no. My time. I will tell you, in the first engagement, I left an active war zone where the people of Kuwait were taking enormously good care of all of the crews from CNN. We set up in the International Hotel, and the citizens of Kuwait would cook us dinner and
Wow.
bring us food and feed us. And I went from that to Geneva, where they had the first OPEC meeting following that first war, the Desert Storm, and attended OPEC and covered the OPEC meeting in Geneva, and I was like the most schizophrenic
Yeah.
from Kuwait City in an abandoned hotel with no power and being fed by citizens of the city to suddenly a five-star international hotel in Geneva. Man, that was whiplash.
Where hundreds of billions of dollars worth of
Oh
wealth is
God.
being distributed around the world.
Oh yeah.
Now, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Having had firsthand experience, when you were there, I would say during first Desert Storm 1 and then also
Yeah.
following 9/11, where were you? What were you thinking? Were you like, this is the right thing to do? We should be here? Or is that an opinion that evolved over time? And did your own opinion about that impact your reporting or your coverage of those events?
I you I have I think that one of the things we should always remember, because it gets lost in these moments of reflection, Saddam Hussein was a bad man. He was a bad man, period. And at the time we were told, he was complicit, if not actually sponsoring the attacks on the World Trade Center.
Mm.
And in my mind, that could not stand. You could that you that you could not let that stand. That would have been weak. It would have been bad. And I had no issues with us going in and engaging in a retaliatory strike. My position on it has evolved over time because, as we both know now, we didn't just go in and strike back and leave. And, we instead, it turned into an occupation. And, and that changed my perspective on it as well. And, I'm thinking we should have withdrawn much sooner than we did. And history will, I think has proven that was the case. It's not what happened, but it's what probably should have happened.
I was listening to a podcast recently with Eric Prince, Blackwater of Blackwater fame,
Yeah, yeah,
and he was kind of echoed the same thing where he said, if you look specifically at Afghanistan, there's a period of time where they had um oh my gosh, I'm spacing. Uh Bin Laden, my gosh, where they
yeah,
had been where they had where they had Bin Laden kind of in a box there,
yeah,
and in his view, the whole Afghanistan situation in terms of taking out, and I've never been in the military, never served, so far be it for me to say, but could have been taken out by some special operators. And he said the second you get, as he put it, big green involved, where now you have this machine of the U.S. military in there. Now you're entrenching yourself, and you're increasing the risk and likelihood that becomes an occupation per se.
yeah, yeah. No,
Uh,
I've known a couple. I've known some
yeah,
people who were operatives for Blackwater, and
yeah,
they echo that same sentiment as well. Yeah,
yeah.
agree.
So through Global War on Terror, were you continuing to do this type of economic reporting where
Yeah.
you
Oh
got
yeah.
OPEC on one side, and so then what came through the O's into say 2010?
Well, we had been doing a ton of stories. I mean, Brent, I did a whole bunch of stories on the broken border and the broken immigration system, and the failure for us to craft and enforce a policy. I did it, and I did stories on the impact on American workers as a result of that. Um, and it's when we were doing our stories on the failure of the American educational system, and how, for all its vaunted great American education, we actually were ranking well below many, many other countries, and asking why. Why? What are we doing wrong? What could we do better? And and we were looking at the impact of American corporations moving manufacturing facilities overseas, the loss of American jobs, the migration of research and development, because R&D can't just happen in a vacuum. It needs to happen on factory floors where you can see if what you're doing is what needs to be done. And basically, they all parts of stories that were part of the what we call the outsourcing America, which also impacted the other set of stories we did on the war on the middle class, because those were the middle class. Those were the people that were losing the jobs. Those were the people that were impacted. That's when you got, I have been, I'm sure Detroit is actually, full of really nice people, but I got sent to Detroit in the middle of winter when I would drive down rows and rows of abandoned factory, and abandoned manufacturing facilities. And it would just, there were days when I thought, God, I don't know if I could get more depressed than I am right
Yeah.
now. And I'm laughing about it, but it wasn't funny. It was brutal, and it's concrete evidence of the meaning and the impact that economics and economic decisions and policies have on people's lives. And that's why I love those stories so much, because it wasn't abstract anymore. It was like this is what happens. This is, think about what you're going to do, because what you do, your actions have consequences. And I thought we were doing what needed to be done in terms of drawing people's attention to the consequences of those actions.
And I completely agree with you in the sense that I think that every community and within that community, the people, they have to have a reason and a purpose to get up. And when I
Amen.
hear political figures on both sides talk about whether they're going to shut down a coal mine in Appalachia, or they're going to move this factory, or they're going to um, make these massive changes that impact all these families to save a couple cents, and then say, "Oh, they can go learn to code." Well, no, no, they can't. It's not that simple. And the purpose of, I think anyway, political authority should be to act in the benefit and on behalf of the people that they are serving. And
Well,
it's,
they are
yeah,
our elected representatives. I mean, it's
absolutely.
right there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it shouldn't necessarily, and again, this might be surprise you, but it should not necessarily be for the benefit of increasing a corporate bottom line by
Right.
1% or so. And that I find that incredibly challenging and frustrating as well. That I think those people, and I think, and this is not a pro or anti Trump thing, and it's not a pro or anti Bernie thing,
Yeah.
but that is why on different ends of the equation, both of those political figures are so appealing to people, because you have a large swath of the country and of the economy that quite frankly feels like they've been screwed
Yep.
good and hard for the last 30, 40 years.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and in many ways they have. And I think we're very fortunate that so far we haven't had larger consequences to that. And my hope is that as we move forward, some of that gets hopefully at least addressed and if not remedied.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, I did a story in Oshkosh Bagosh, right? And I was in Oshkosh Bagosh, Wisconsin, and they had shut the factory down there. And I'm talking to the C-level executives, and I'm like, when'd you do this? These people have been there. People have been working in making your products for decades. They came out of high school and went to work in your factories. Why did you do this? And they were the answer, and it was a variation of an answer I got over and over and over again, which was, well, everybody else is moving their production to a cheaper place. And if we don't move our production to a cheaper place, we can't compete on a price basis. And if we can't compete on a price basis, it means we lose the company. And I thought, I understand that. I get that,
Mhm.
but you're already losing a giant piece of your company by doing what you're doing and making the decisions that you're making. And I understand those are painful, hard decisions. There's no righteousness in my mind about this. It's like, I think people need to understand that it is tough on both sides of that equation, because, as a manager, I never liked it when I had to call somebody in and say, this is not working out and you're not doing and not performing up to expectations. And we're going to have to let you go. That was the most horrible conversation you could, as a manager have, right? And so I understood how they felt. I was like, I get it, but it's like, man, stories are complex, and the realities of stories are even more complex. And yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's my piece.
No, and I agree with that. And editing team, quick pause here. If you go over a little bit, Bill, you okay? You have something
Yeah,
next?
yeah, keep going. Yeah,
Okay,
we're
cool.
fine.
All right, we'll pick back up now. And I agree with that, but I also think that it is a short-sighted. Now, I'm as capitalistic as they come.
Yep.
Um, but what you find is that we were moving production and moving capacity overseas, not into necessarily environments that were more competitive naturally, but they were more competitive because they're subsidized by other countries, or that we have vastly different trade treatment to that country versus what they did with us. So they were
Mm,
getting pushed over to an unnatural playing field. But at the same point now, you have to look at a country, and I think that we're turning the corner here, because one of the great things that I think has happened in the wake of COVID and also Russia Ukraine, if there can be any positives taken, is that people suddenly realize now that, wait a second, we can't have our supply lines stretched around the entire world. Maybe it is worth it to produce this $5 bolt that makes this 10 or $20,000 machine run for 50 cents more in the United States, because now we can't get it from China because the shipping lanes are screwed up, and because
yeah,
the different geopolitical tensions. And I
yeah.
think you are seeing onshoring, and I think there is a renaissance in American manufacturing that is happening. It's only at the front end, which is a good thing. But when you have industrial capacity in a country that gets hollowed out, whether by accident or somewhat intentionally, or just by sheer greed, not good. It's not good.
No, and you know what's interesting, Brady? This is a dynamic that has a role in American history, because originally Britain conceived of America as being its sort of agricultural wing,
Right.
if you were. In the founding fathers, you can go. I'm trying to remember what the names of the papers are, but there was an argument
Federalist
presented
Papers.
with Madison and with Jefferson
Yeah.
about the need to have our own manufacturing base, because we could not be a country, we could not be an independent country without that manufacturing base. And it was, this was an agrarian society. And back then they realized, if we're going to be anything, if we're going to become anything, if we want our independence, then we are going to have a manufacturing base, uh, you know, to become self-sustaining,
Yep.
to hire people and give people jobs. It's incredible. It is a long ongoing debate in the world, in this country in particular, in the history of this country.
No question. So as we move into the 2010 to 2020 era,
Mm.
what were you up to at that point?
Well, I through 20, I started actually somewhere around 20. When did the CNN shut down Lou's show? And my time frame is vague here, and I apologize. And we were up until about 2014, maybe. And then they shut it down, and I started scrambling and doing freelance work. And for a while, uh, for a couple of years, wrote an energy column actually for Forbes.com, talking about the need for and the importance of energy. And my argument was, yes, green's good, sustainable's great, renewable's wonderful. But the key, most important things about energy is that it has to be sustainable, it has to be inexpensive, and it has to be plentiful. You know, Otherwise it's of no use. I was interested in the new technologies and the new green technologies, and I wrote about developments there. But I also wrote about, the importance of fossil fuels, and the tremendous gains that were being made with natural gas, in terms of natural gas being used to generate electricity. And during that time period, Brent, the United States had developed the smallest carbon footprint of any developed country in the world, although you would not know it by the way people kept screaming about how we're destroying the world and melting ice and all going to go, off to, oblivion. but we were making amazing, tremendous changes and strides toward doing the very things that people wanted to be doing, but nobody could talk about it clearly because everybody wanted to make it a political argument
Right.
instead of just a simple practical argument. And it frustrated me, and that was during 2015, 16, 17 that I did that. And right around then, I went to work for Newsmax, actually, in an early iteration of Newsmax back when they were on 40th Street, right across from Bryant Park in New York, and worked with them as an executive producer. Did a special, which I really like, which is still on YouTube that you can find with Ben Stein about
Yeah.
the Nixon Library and the reopening of the Nixon Library after they'd done a tremendous renovation of it. And Ben was amazing, amazing to work with, and that special that's still out there. If you look for the Nixon Library and Ben Stein, I'm sure you can find it. And he was great, and I really enjoyed that. And then that time came to an end because they were going to do some restructuring. And about 2018, I went to work for I-24, which is a Tel Aviv based news channel. That was one of my favorite places to work, even though I only worked there for about a year, because but they were based in Tel Aviv. They had uh, they had correspondence, Hebrew correspondence, and they had Arab correspondence. And they were on cable here briefly for a while,
Hmm.
and it was a tremendous news organization in terms of its insights into what was happening in the Middle East. And man, I can't tell you how many times over the last couple of years I have regretted that they made a decision to cut back their operations here. They closed all their operations here, and I was sad because I really liked that news organization. All of which brings us up to now. When I started working for Proudmouth, I started working for Proudmouth about a year ago after doing a lot of different kind of freelance work and scraping together money from here and there in different projects. And I have to say, I really I like Proudmouth, and I like the people I work with. And Brent, I like the approach that you bring to financial advising, because your podcast is not afraid. This is probably a good example of that kind of podcast. It's not afraid to to go off into things that interest you, to go off into things that you find interesting that you want to talk about, and always bring them back into the necessary component that makes up your job and what you do for people, which is make sure they understand economics are important. Not the most important thing in your life. Your family, your faith are way, way more important than any kind of money's ever going to be. But money's important, and you need to plan and you need to think about those kinds of things. And, these shouldn't be weird, strange, hard to have conversations. This should just be as natural as any other conversation that we have during the course of our day.
I agree with that. I think in terms of, the podcast is, it almost may not be correctly titled in terms of smart money simplified, because we do talk about some other things,
No, but I
but
do like it because it's like
yeah.
it is often about smart money, and it is often about how, yeah, it's not that hard. It's
Well,
actually pretty simple.
but the reason though that I love doing the podcast, but one of the reasons that I think that even if we're off on a story or having a discussion with somebody that may not be directly related to what's happening in the financial markets, is the older I get, I'm 50, and I think you would definitely agree with this, having gotten a little bit of your story, 51 years old, what you realize is, as when you're young, it's very easy to compartmentalize little things like this exists here and this exists here and this
Yeah.
exists here, and there's massive gaps between those little compartments. And I think one of the beauties of aging a little bit and getting older is you start to see those gaps start getting filled in by experiences and people
Yes.
that you've met and good things and bad things and everything that's happened. And then I think I'm just starting to get in the stage in my life where you realize, you pull a string over here and something that's completely unrelated gets pulled out of whack over
Yeah.
here, and you realize it's all integrated. And if money is just an expression of energy stored is how I like to think of it. It's,
Yeah,
your wealth is kind of energy that you stored up, and sometimes you got to expend it. Sometimes it's stronger, sometimes it's weaker, but it's all. I mean, this is an economic planet. It's all tied together. There's no question about that, and
absolutely.
it's one of the reasons that I enjoy the discussions that you and I have with people in covering a lot of topics where, it's not just saving for retirement. It's what is the context of the world that we're living in, and
No,
and that's
I know a lot
anyway.
of crafts. I know a lot of tradesmen. I know a lot of tradesmen. I know electricians and plumbers, and I know guys who do excavation work for a living, right? And I would put you in a class of individuals in the sense that your tools are different. The tools that you work with, are is money. Money is a tool. And what you bring to that are strategies. You bring the idea of planning with it. You bring the idea of, did you know this tool can be used this way and do these kinds of things? And so it's like, I mean, that's what I get out of working with you on this podcast and listening to the episodes, the past episodes of this podcast, because it's just, it's manageable if you pay attention and you decide you're going to manage it, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if it gives you any insight into my brain, I did a survey, I guess a year or so back, and it was a organization called the Why Institute, and it was about finding your why in life, and it was really
Mm,
interesting. And you answer dozens and dozens and dozens of questions. And what mine came up with, which I hadn't thought of, but my number one why, like why are you getting up in the morning, why are you doing things, is to make sense of things.
yeah.
To understand things, to make sense of things. And so I think that's the podcast certainly helps me do that. Well, the last question for you, then we'll wrap it up here.
Okay.
Uh, so you've been in obviously journalism, which really is about exploring not only systems of power, but also how they impact people around the country and around the world your entire career.
Yeah.
We are, without asking you to take sides, because I don't do that with people, and I wouldn't ask you to do as well. But we're coming into an election season here. We're 3 months out as we record this. That is beyond contentious. We had an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. We had Joe Biden that obviously impaired. It just dropped. You have Kamala Harris. You've got a lot of moving parts. And what concerns me, like one of my largest concerns for our country, is the likelihood that this fabric that we've woven together gets torn apart even more than it is. What is your feeling about, and it's not an endorsement or not, but what is your feeling about what is going to come in these next 3 months, and how, if at all, the rifts that we have in our society are going to resolve themselves?
Is he sighed really deeply here?
Hmm.
Um, it is my fervent prayer that in these dark, contentious, tense times, find that it proves our mettle as a people. Because the thing I offend over and over and over again, Brent, is that, and this was true. David talked about this a little bit in your last podcast. Most of us live within a few degrees of each other politically.
Hmm.
I know all I know all kinds and manner of peoples and who of different sexualities and sexual preferences and religious beliefs and faith practices in different socioeconomic strata and different colors and different national origins. And the thing is that we all have so much more in common with each other than the politics in the media would have us believe, because it is in the politicians' benefit to divide us and make us choose. It is the media's belief that we won't read them if they don't present slanted, hysterical views of what's going on. It's important for us to remember, you know what? It's like Bill and that right total stranger in Port Authority 2 days after 9/11, saying it's the most amazing moment in our life, and we couldn't believe it, and we were hugging each other in the middle of a big giant empty Port Authority. That's America. That's who we are. And we need to remember that. And I hope that we remember that. I would love it if our politicians would remind us of that. I would love it if our politicians were sincere in terms of their belief about our unity. And that is what will make us stronger, because that is what makes us strong. That is where we are. And I just want us to remember, in the face of nobody else reminding us, that we really are unified in so many ways, and we have so much more in common with one another than we do in terms of differences. I mean, you and I could have a podcast where we talk about where we disagree on a whole bunch of stuff, and it's
Absolutely.
fine.
Mhm.
I like conversations with people I don't agree with. But right now, at this moment in our history, I really want us to like just stop and say, there's way too much insanity. And I don't know anybody that's really insane. I know a few people that are
Mhm.
insane, but most of the people I know aren't. They're not. And just remember that. Just stop and take a deep breath in, remember that. And I think that help all of us in terms of, deciding what we're going to do, how we're going to vote, and what, where our choices are. But, politics isn't going to give it to us, and the media, unfortunately, won't give it to us. So I will give you a brief endorsement, which you can cut. I do read the Free Press, the FP.com, all of the time, and I find their reporting reminds me frequently, yeah, we have a whole lot more in common. We have a lot more going on with each other than we do against each other.
I completely agree. I've been fortunate. 58 countries I've been to now, or everywhere from, I was in Zimbabwe during the collapse and the farmers were getting killed. I was in Iran. I got back 8 days before 9/11. I've been a lot of wonderful, beautiful places in the world, and a lot of places where there's a lot of turmoil. And I fervently believe this at the core of my being is 99.9% of people on this planet, they want to live in some measure of peace. They want to be left alone.
Yeah.
The other 0.01% are in politics. and
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Totally agree on that.
Well, Bill, man, this was awesome. I really thank you for doing this because I've learned something. There's so much of the banter that we have back and forth off the air before we record these with guests, and it was far past time for you to come on and share a little bit of your experience with us. So thank you.
Oh no, it was a pleasure. And for those of you who are listening to this podcast who like maybe just came across it and had never listened before, I can assure you this podcast is as interesting, if not more interesting, time after time. And Brent, for those people who are listening who don't know you, who are thinking, okay, maybe I should talk to Brent. How would they get a hold of you? How would they reach out to you?
Yeah, you can call us here directly at the office, 602-255-0555. Myself or somebody on the team will pick up. Pretty active on LinkedIn. We post there almost every single day. And tws.finance. Tws.finance is our website and has every conceivable way to reach us if you want to reach out and have a further discussion. But to Bill's point, yeah, like and subscribe. It definitely helps. Share
Yeah.
this with your friends if you found some value in it. We'd appreciate it.
No, absolutely. I mean, follow if you're not a subscriber already. And then do tell people if you like the podcast, that's our request here. It's like if you like it, share it with people and let people know, because word of mouth promotion is it's the best promotion, to be honest with you.
No question.
Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker, and on behalf of Brent and everybody at TWS, thank you for taking the time to listen today. And I will remind you, as always, remember, you can go out today and make today a great day or not. You do have a choice, and it's yours to make. Thanks so much. Until next time.